She waited 4 years for one dinner with her parents. But what happened next changed everything. My name is Sophia Taylor, and I live in Charleston, South Carolina, where I spend my days coordinating restoration projects for historic hotels, places that wealthy guests admire from a distance but rarely understand. Every detail matters in my work, every crack repaired, every surface brought back to life. I've built a career restoring things people almost let fade away. But there's one thing I could never quite restore: my relationship with my parents. For 4 long years, we hadn't shared a meal in the same room. Not during Christmas, not on Thanksgiving, not even on my birthday. Silence had quietly replaced what used to be family, so when they finally agreed to visit me, I didn't hesitate. I paid for everything. Flights, luggage, transportation, even a rental car, because I believed this was my chance to bring us back together. I cleaned my townhouse until it looked like something out of a magazine. I filled it with fresh flowers, with warmth, with hope. I cooked the meals. They loved the kind that once made our house feel like home. Every evening I set the table carefully, placing 4 plates, folding napkins just right, lighting candles, like it meant something. I imagined laughter, stories, maybe even an apology that had been waiting for years. I imagined a family returning to the table. But deep down, there was a quiet fear. I didn't want to name the fear that I had been holding on to something they had already let go of. Still, I chose to believe. Because sometimes hope isn't logical, it's something you cling to when you don't want to accept the truth. And that was the beginning of everything changing. If you've ever held on to someone who slowly let go of you, stay with me, because what happened next will hit harder than you expect. And if you want to see how this story unfolds, subscribe now, so you don't miss the next part, and the newest stories, just like this. The first night I told myself not to overthink it. Travel is exhausting, I reasoned. People need time to settle in, especially after a long flight. So when the evening passed and my phone stayed silent, I smiled to myself and said, tomorrow will be different. I carefully wrapped the pot roast, covered the lemon pie, and blew out the candles that had been waiting for a moment that never came. The next morning I woke up early, made fresh coffee, and sent a message. Good morning. I can have brunch ready whenever you're free. No rush. I even added a smiling emoji, trying to keep things light, trying to make it easy for them to come to me. Hours passed. 1 hour, then 2, then more. Around noon, I opened social media, and that's when everything inside me shifted just a little. There they were. My parents sitting at a beautiful waterfront restaurant laughing with my sister Hannah and her kids. The caption read, "Best surprise visit ever." My mother commented underneath, "Wouldn't miss it for the world." I stared at that sentence longer than I should have. Wouldn't miss it for the world. But somehow they had missed me for years, and it never seemed to matter. Still, I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was just one meal. Maybe they'd come over later. So that evening I set the table again. 4 plates, 4 napkins, candles lit. I waited. The sky darkened. The food cooled. My phone remained silent. Not even a message this time. By the second night, the pattern began to feel heavier. I texted again, gentle, careful, never demanding dinner's ready whenever you want to come by. The reply came hours later, soft and vague. That sounds lovely, sweetie. Let's see how the evening goes. But the evening went somewhere else again. Another photo appeared, another moment shared without me. By the third night, something inside me stopped expecting and started observing. The table was no longer set with hope. It was set with truth. 4 plates untouched, 4 seats empty, and one daughter realizing she wasn't being forgotten by accident, she was being overlooked by choice. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, stay with me, because what happens next isn't just painful, it changes everything. And if you want to see the moment everything finally breaks, subscribe now, so you don't miss the next part and the newest stories. By the next day, the pattern was no longer something I could explain. It was something I had to face. Every time I opened my phone, there was a new photo, a new moment, a new memory, being created without me. My parents smiling beside Hannah's kids. My father fixing something around her house like he used to do for ours. My mother folding laundry on a couch that wasn't mine, laughing like she belonged there. And maybe that was the truth that hurt the most. They didn't just choose her house, they chose her life. I wasn't just being missed, I was being replaced. I tried to stay calm, to stay reasonable. I told myself that families go through phases, that maybe this was just timing, just circumstance. But deep down, I knew better. Because it wasn't just what they were doing, it was what they weren't doing. They weren't calling me. They weren't asking when they could come over. They weren't even pretending anymore. And somehow, the silence between us grew louder than any argument ever could. That afternoon, I sat alone at my dining table, staring at the same 4 plates I had set again out of habit. Not hope this time, just habit. I realized I didn't even remember what it felt like to be chosen first, to be the place someone wanted to go, not the place they could visit later if nothing better came along. And that realization didn't break me. It clarified everything. Because when someone shows you where you stand in their life, it's not confusion, it's information. And I had been ignoring it for far too long. That night, I didn't check my phone as often. I didn't wait by the door. I didn't reheat the food again and again, hoping for a last-minute message. Instead, I sat with the truth, uncomfortable as it was. They had come all this way, and still they hadn't come to me. Not once. Not by accident. Not by delay. But by choice. And for the first time, I started to wonder not why they weren't showing up, but why I kept waiting for them to. If this feels painfully familiar, stay with me, because what happens next is the moment everything changes. And if you want to follow the rest of this story and see how it all unfolds, subscribe now so you don't miss the next part and the newest videos. We are seeing you. We're in the same city. That was all it took to break something she could never fix again. That afternoon, I finally decided to call my father. Not because I hadn't tried enough already, but because silence was starting to feel heavier than rejection. When he answered, I could hear everything before he even spoke. Kids, laughing, dishes, clinking voices, layered over each other in the kind of noise that only comes from a full, busy home. A home I wasn't in. "Hey, Soph," he said, casual, almost distracted. "Everything okay?" That question caught me off guard. Everything okay? I almost laughed, but I held it back. I told him I just wanted to check what time they planned to come over, that I had dinner ready again. There was a pause, just long enough for the truth to settle between us, before he tried to smooth it over. "Tonight might be a little tricky," he said. "Hannah's place is just more convenient with the kids, and your mom doesn't want to keep going back and forth." Back and forth. The words echoed in my head. 30 minutes had suddenly become a burden. A distance too inconvenient. I tightened my grip on the phone and said, as calmly as I could, "Dad, I flew you here to see me." He sighed, not angrily, but like I was making something simple, unnecessarily complicated. Then he said the sentence I would replay in my mind over and over again. "We are seeing you, you know. We're in the same city." For a moment, I couldn't speak, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I didn't recognize the version of love he was describing. Being nearby was now enough. Being present was optional. Effort had been replaced with proximity, and somehow that counted. That was when something shifted inside me, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly and permanently. Because I realized he believed it. He truly thought that being close physically meant he had shown up emotionally. And maybe that was the difference between us. I had spent years thinking love was something you demonstrated, something you made time for, something you showed through actions. But to them it had become something far simpler, something that required almost nothing at all. That evening I set the table again, not because I believed they were coming this time, but because I needed to see it clearly. 4 plates, 4 chairs, one truth I could no longer ignore. I wasn't asking for too much. I had just been asking the wrong people. If you've ever been told it's enough when you knew it wasn't, stay with me, because the next decision she makes will change everything. And if you want to see how far this goes, subscribe now so you don't miss the next part and the newest stories. That night, after the 4th untouched dinner, I didn't go to bed right away. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels revealing. For days I had been trying to understand their behavior, trying to explain it, excuse it, soften it into something I could live with. But something inside me had shifted after that call with my father. I stopped asking why they weren't showing up, and started asking what had been keeping me tied to them for so long. So instead of cleaning the kitchen or reheating food one more time, I opened my laptop, Not for work, not to distract myself, but to look at something I had been avoiding for years. My bank records. At first it felt harmless. Just a quick check. Just curiosity. But as I scrolled line by line, month after month, that quiet in the room began to change. It became heavier, sharper, undeniable. There were transfers I had forgotten about, payments I had justified in the moment and never questioned again. Mortgage contributions when my father said business was slow. Prescription coverage when my mother said insurance had become complicated. Emergency expenses that somehow never stayed emergencies. Support for Hannah's children just temporarily, just until things got easier. Except things never got easier. They just became expected. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen, my fingers suddenly cold. Because when I added everything together, when I stopped looking at each payment as a separate act of kindness and finally saw the whole picture, the number didn't look like generosity anymore. It looked like a pattern. Over $62,000, not including this trip, not including the flights, the car, the groceries, sitting untouched in my refrigerator. Over $62,000, and not once had I been treated like someone who mattered. That realization didn't come with tears. It came with clarity, because for the first time I understood something I had been too close to see. I hadn't just been helping my family. I had been replacing responsibility. They no longer wanted to carry. And the worst part wasn't the money. It was what the money had allowed. It had allowed them to stay comfortable without ever having to show up for me. It had allowed them to call me independent instead of involved, reliable instead of loved. Slowly, I opened a blank spreadsheet and began documenting everything. Dates, amounts, reasons, confirmations. Not because I needed proof for them, but because I needed truth for myself. Each line I added felt less like anger and more like waking up. At the bottom, I typed one sentence, then stared at it for a long time. Stop funding people who do not show up for you. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was understanding. And once you understand something that clearly, you can't go back to pretending it's different. If you've ever given everything and still felt invisible, stay with me. Because what she does next will change everything. And if you want to see the moment she finally stops, subscribe now so you don't miss the next part and the newest stories. That realization didn't hit me all at once. It unfolded slowly, like something I had always known, but refused to name. I sat there staring at the spreadsheet, at the long list of transfers and payments. And for the first time, I wasn't seeing generosity. I was seeing a role. A role I had been playing for years without ever agreeing to it. Not daughter, not priority, not even someone they missed. I was the reliable one, the one who would handle things, the one who would say yes before they even had to ask. And somewhere along the way, that became my identity in their lives. It wasn't said out loud, but it didn't need to be. Every time they called only when something was wrong. Every time they sounded relieved instead of grateful. Every time they told me how strong and independent I was, it translated into something else entirely. It meant they didn't have to show up. It meant they didn't have to choose me. Because I had already chosen them, over and over again. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, and memories started to surface, small moments I had dismissed, before moments that suddenly made sense in a way they never had. Waiting after school longer than everyone else, because my parents were busy with something that mattered more. Sitting at a dinner table where the conversation always seemed to revolve around someone else. Learning quietly that needing less made things easier for everyone. That being low maintenance made me easier to love, or at least easier to manage. And I carried that lesson into adulthood, without even realizing it. I built a life where I needed nothing, asked for nothing, expected nothing. And in return, I received exactly that, nothing. The painful part wasn't that they had changed. It was that they hadn't. They had always been this way. I was just the one who finally saw it clearly. I had spent years thinking that if I gave enough, if I was patient enough, if I proved myself enough, things would balance out. That one day they would look at me and see not just what I provided, but who I was. But love doesn't grow in silence. And respect doesn't come from being endlessly available. That was the truth I had been avoiding. And now that I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I wasn't just someone they overlooked. I was someone they depended on, without ever valuing. And the more I thought about it, the more I understood something that felt both painful and freeing at the same time. I had taught them how to treat me. Not intentionally, not knowingly, but through every time I said yes when I wanted to say no, every time I made their problems mine, every time I stayed quiet to keep the peace. I had shown them that I would always be there, no matter how little they gave in return. And once a pattern like that is set, it doesn't change on its own. Someone has to break it. I opened my eyes and looked at the screen again, at the total that no longer shocked me, but explained everything. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about value. And for the first time in my life, I started to question not how much I was willing to give, but how much I was willing to accept. If you've ever felt like you were giving more than you were receiving, comment 1 below. Sometimes recognizing the pattern is the first step to changing it. The decision didn't feel dramatic. It didn't come with raised voices or tears or some sudden burst of anger. It came quietly, almost calmly, like something that had already been made long before I admitted it to myself. I sat at my desk, the spreadsheet still open in front of me, the numbers no longer shocking but clarifying. For the first time, I wasn't asking what they needed. I was asking what I needed. And the answer was simple, even if it wasn't easy. I needed to stop. Not slowly. Not eventually. Completely. I opened a new email and stared at the blank screen longer than I expected. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what to say. And I understood what it would mean once I said it. There would be no going back to the version of me they were used to. No more quiet transfers. No more automatic yes, no more stepping in before they even had to ask. My hands hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then I began to type. Mom and Dad, I wrote, keeping my tone steady, not emotional, not defensive. I paid for this trip because I believed you wanted to spend time with me after so long apart. Instead, you chose to stay elsewhere and declined every invitation I made. I paused, reread the sentence, then continued. I respect your choice. Now I'm making mine. That line felt heavier than anything else, not because it was harsh, but because it was final. I went on to explain clearly and directly that effective immediately, I would no longer provide financial support. No more covering bills. No more contributing to expenses that were not mine. No more stepping in as a solution. I wasn't asking for permission. I wasn't opening a discussion. I was stating a boundary. When I finished, I read the email again. It wasn't long. It wasn't emotional. It didn't accuse or attack. It simply told the truth. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Before sending it, I attached the spreadsheet. Not as a weapon, not as a way to make them feel guilty, but as a record. A reality that could no longer be ignored or rewritten. Then I hesitated for a moment longer, just long enough for doubt to try one last time. A small voice, asking if I was being too harsh, too cold, too selfish. But another voice, quieter and steadier, answered it. No, this is what respect looks like when you finally give it to yourself. I clicked send. And just like that, something shifted. Not outside, not immediately, but inside. The waiting stopped. The justifying stopped. The hoping that things would change on their own stopped. Because I had changed. Within minutes, my phone lit up. Calls, messages, names appearing one after another. But I didn't pick it up. Not yet. For once, I didn't rush to respond. Didn't try to fix the discomfort I had created. I let it sit. I let them feel what I had been feeling for years. Uncertainty, silence, distance. And as I sat there in the quiet, I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't feel guilty. I felt clear. Clear in a way I had never felt before. Because boundaries don't destroy relationships. They reveal them. The response didn't take long. It never does when something people depend on suddenly disappears. My phone kept lighting up again and again. Calls stacking on top of each other, messages coming in faster than I could read them. My father, first. Then my mother, then Hannah, then all of them again, like a loop they couldn't break. For a moment I just watched the screen, not picking it up, not reacting, just observing, because this was the part I had never allowed myself to see clearly before. Not how they responded when I needed them, but how quickly they reacted when they needed me. Eventually I answered. Not out of urgency, not out of guilt, but because I wanted to hear it without filters. My mother didn't greet me. She didn't ask how I was. Her voice came through tight and sharp. You need to undo whatever you just did. Not what happened, not why, just fix it. I leaned back in my chair and let the words sit between us. For years, I would have rushed to explain, to soften, to make it easier for her to accept. But this time I didn't. Did you read the email? I asked calmly. She exhaled hard. Of course I did. We all did. And I don't understand why you're punishing us over something so small. Something small. That was how it looked to her. A week of being ignored. Years of being used, reduced to inconvenience. My father's voice came in next, quieter, but no less firm. We're family, Sophia. This isn't how family handles things. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. That sentence had always meant the same thing. Keep the peace, stay quiet, don't disrupt what works for everyone else. I finally spoke steady without raising my voice. Family also shows up. Silence followed. Not the kind filled with confusion, the kind filled with recognition they didn't want to admit. My mother shifted her tone, then softer but not softer in truth, softer in strategy. She started listing things. The mortgage payment coming up, her prescriptions needing renewal, Hannah's expenses already planned around my support. It wasn't an apology. It was a reminder of everything they expected to continue. And that was the moment it became undeniable. They weren't calling because they missed me. They were calling because something had changed and it affected them. I closed my eyes for a second, not to escape the conversation, but to steady myself in it. Because the old version of me would have folded right there, would have said okay, would have found a way to fix it like always. But this time I didn't move. I understand that this is difficult, I said, but my decision isn't changing. The line went quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not like something was being avoided, but like something was finally being faced. After that call, something fundamental shifted, not just in what I did, but in what I allowed. The next messages came quickly, more urgent, now more emotional, but underneath it all, they sounded the same. My mother's voice notes grew longer, her tone moving from anger to hurt, to something that sounded almost like fear. My father tried to stay measured, practical, asking if we could at least talk in person before making any final decisions. Hannah's messages were sharper, defensive, accusing me of overreacting, of making everything about myself. For a moment I read them all, not to respond, not to argue, but to understand. And what I understood was simple. They were reacting to the loss of what I provided, not the loss of me. That realization didn't sting the way it used to. It didn't pull me back into guilt or confusion. It steadied me. Because once you see the difference between being valued and being useful, you can't unsee it. That afternoon, my father sent a message saying they were outside my townhouse. I stared at the photo he attached, his car parked at the curb, my mother, sitting inside, her face turned away from the camera. For a split second, the old instinct returned. Open the door. Fix this. Don't let them leave like this. But I stayed where I was. Because I remembered every night I had sat at that table waiting for them. Every invitation that had gone unanswered. Every moment I had made space for them while they made none for me. I typed, slowly choosing each word carefully, not to hurt them, but to protect myself. I told you I'm not available today. I hope you have a safe trip tomorrow. I read it once, then sent it before I could rewrite it into something softer, something easier for them to accept. My phone buzzed immediately. My father replied that my mother was crying in the car. That sentence used to be enough to undo me. It used to send me running back, apologizing for something I hadn't even done. But this time I sat still. Because I remembered something else too. I had cried alone for nights, and no one had shown up for that. The difference was no longer something I could ignore. That evening I didn't go home. I stayed out longer than usual, not to escape, but to give myself space to breathe without the weight of expectation pressing down on me. For the first time in a long time, I felt something unfamiliar. Not relief exactly, not happiness, but something quieter and more stable. I felt steady. The next morning they left without seeing me. And that sentence, which once would have felt like failure now, felt like truth. They had come all this way, stayed close enough to reach me at any moment, and still they hadn't come. not until something they depended on was taken away. And once I saw that clearly, I stopped trying to rewrite it into something kinder than it was. Because clarity doesn't need comfort, it needs honesty. And honesty for the first time was finally on my side. The weeks after they left were not easy. There was no sudden sense of victory, no moment where everything felt right again. Instead, it was quiet in a different way, the kind of quiet that comes after something important has ended. My phone still lit up from time to time, messages from my mother, filled with long explanations about sacrifice, and family messages from my father, trying to keep things practical, asking if we could adjust, instead of stop completely. Hannah posted things online too. Vague lines about loyalty and gratitude, carefully written, so they sounded meaningful but never specific enough to take responsibility. For the first time, I didn't respond to everything. I didn't defend myself. I didn't try to explain my side again and again. I answered once clearly and simply, I love you, but I will not continue supporting you financially. If we are going to have a relationship, it has to be built on respect, consistency, and mutual effort, not obligation. After that, I let the silence do what words never could, and something unexpected happened. Life went on for them and for me. My parents adjusted, not dramatically, not perfectly, but enough to show me something I had never allowed myself to believe. They were capable. My father took on more work. My mother found more affordable ways to manage her expenses. Hannah changed her plans, scaled things down, figured it out. No one fell apart. No one was destroyed. The world didn't end because I stopped holding it together for them. That realization was both freeing and painful, because it meant I hadn't been saving them from disaster. I had been saving them from inconvenience. And in doing that, I had made it easier for them not to choose me. About a month later, something changed again, but this time it wasn't immediate and it wasn't reactive. It was quieter, slower, and more honest. A letter arrived from my father. Not a text, not a rushed call, a letter. He wrote that he had been thinking about that week, replaying it, and that he couldn't defend their choices. He admitted that calling me independent had become a way to avoid showing up. He said he had mistaken my strength for a lack of need. I read that sentence more than once. Not because it fixed everything, but because it was the first time I felt seen in a way that wasn't tied to what I could provide. My mother took longer. Her apology didn't come in one clear moment. It came in pieces, less defensiveness, more listening, fewer excuses. And eventually, she said something simple. She didn't know how to apologize without making excuses, but she wanted to learn. That mattered more than any perfect words. When they visited again later, things were different. Not perfect, not effortless, but real. They made plans with me, not around me. They showed up. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to earn my place at the table. I had claimed it. The lesson wasn't that people always change when you set boundaries. Sometimes they don't. The lesson was that I changed. I learned that love without respect will always feel like absence, that being strong doesn't mean being silent, that giving endlessly doesn't create connection, it can hide the lack of it. And most importantly, I learned that boundaries are not walls meant to push people away. They are doors with conditions. They tell people how to enter your life, and they protect what matters once they're inside. I didn't lose my family when I stopped giving. I found myself, and from that place, any relationship that remained finally had a chance to be real. That realization changed everything, because it meant I had never needed to sacrifice myself to keep things stable. I had simply believed I did. About a month later, the first real shift happened, not in what they needed, but in how they spoke. My father sent a letter, not a message, not a quick call. A letter. In it, he admitted that he had replayed that week again and again, and that he could no longer defend the choices they had made. He said that calling me independent had become a way to avoid responsibility, not a compliment. That he had mistaken my strength for not needing care. I read those words more than once, not because they erased what had happened, but because they acknowledged it. An acknowledgement is where change begins. My mother took longer, but when she finally spoke without excuses, it was simple. She said she didn't know how to apologize without defending herself, but she wanted to learn. That mattered more than perfect words ever could. When they visited again later, everything felt different, not easy, not natural, but real. They asked when I was available. They came when they said they would. They stayed present. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to earn my place in the room. I was already part of it. The story didn't end with everything being fixed. That's not how real life works. Some things remained imperfect. Some distance remained. Some trust had to be rebuilt slowly. But the most important thing had already changed. I had changed. I learned that love without respect will always feel like absence, no matter how often it is spoken. I learned that being strong doesn't mean being silent or endlessly giving. I learned that boundaries are not punishments, they are clarity. They show people where you stand and what you value, and sometimes they reveal who is willing to meet you there. Most of all, I learned that you cannot build a healthy relationship by abandoning yourself. Because the moment you stop doing that, everything becomes clearer, even if it becomes harder first. I didn't lose my family when I stopped giving. I found a version of myself that no longer needed to be chosen to feel worthy. And from that place, any relationship that remains becomes a choice, not a requirement. And that is where real connection finally begins. If this story made you think about your own boundaries, your own value, and the way you give to others, subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this and not miss the next one. Sometimes the right story comes at the moment you need it most.